we've been block walking for the last 3 to 4 months, and we've gotten a team of volunteers that we've already reached more than 1,500 homes before 2020, actually. And so getting a coalition of volunteers, getting different organizations involved, and then once we get, that's what's necessary. And we'll, always being able to continue to raise, but also there's lots of other ways to reach voters than the non-traditional ways. And so I think what really matters is we all need to get around the person we think is going to flip the district in November 2020, not just who they think is most electable for March, but who's going to be able to beat Sarah later on in the year. And so those are some of the things I would consider, and who also identifies a lot with the different people that live in the district. For example, I'm a mom of 2 with public school. I'm a business owner for the last decade. I'm a child of an immigrant. I'm married to an immigrant. I've lived in 6 countries and speak a few languages. I have a lot of different community groups.
All right, thank you so much. Glenn, the little spin I'm going to take on yours answer, in addition to telling us how you think that you're going to beat Sarah Davis, but how is it that you plan on getting some of the more institutional endorsements that she's traditionally received, like Planned Parenthood?
Well, I think really we have 2 important numbers that we need to use when we're talking about Sarah Davis's record. The first number is 1,205 and the second number is 43. 1,205 represents the number of missed votes Sarah Davis had in 2019. Now, I don't want to make presumptions about her mindset, but it seems to me like she was seeking to avoid accountability on some of the tough issues facing Houston. And we talked about Planned Parenthood. 3 of those absences involved being absent for the Born Alive Act, which was put in front of the House this past legislature. So even on issues where she is supposedly good, she's not showing up. Let's go to that other number, 43. 43% of the time, Sarah Davis was absent from her post. That's the kind of statistic you can put in front of any voter of any ideology and would find that number unacceptable. She was second from the worst in terms of her presence voting, alongside all of the other votes where she voted the wrong way. We need to hold her not just subjectively accountable, but objectively accountable to the fact that she has not been showing up for this district.
Okay, and I'm going to go right back to you. So I guess you get another 130 here, but because you mentioned it in your opening statement, you talked a lot about LGBTQ rights. How can you deal with the fact that HRC just endorsed Sarah Davis? I mean, how do we get that back?
Well, I think we need to look at results. We need to look at results and realize that we have a lot of fact that expansion. We need to focus not just on expanding Medicaid, but ensuring it's expanded with fidelity, which means ensuring that we follow federal guidelines that allow gender-affirming procedures and healthcare for folks in the trans community. So I think when we take it to voters, yes, she may get some of these endorsements as an incumbent, but when we actually talk on the issues and the opportunities we have in front of us, a Republican majority isn't going to pass those laws the way we want to see them. A Democratic majority will, and that's why we're going to flip this seat.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Ruth, one of the things you mentioned immigration, and can you tell us a little bit about what differences there are between you and Sarah Davis on the immigration issues?
Well, first of all, she co-sponsored SB4, the anti-immigration bill, the Show Me Your Papers bill. And I mean, I think that says a lot about how she perceives the world. She hasn't spoken out against all the atrocities of the Trump administration and family separation at the border, which I was down there multiple times, along with my staff, to help put people back together again and speak out against everything that the administration has done. So that's one thing that I think is super critical. And when we're looking at somebody who looks at the big picture, how does she treat people in general? If she's willing to put people in peril to make them afraid, and then this isn't a person that we want here, because you just extend this fear that what started in 2017 with the Texas legislature, and we see that echoed and magnified with the Trump administration. So this is something that she's been behind, and I think that we can see that it's very in line with the Trump administration's anti-immigration mentality, and she might pretend to be a moderate Republican, but we cannot be fooled by this. This is how she thinks, and this is what she would do. And we are at the border. We are a border state. We have detention facilities. We have immigrants. We are a city and a state of immigrants. And this is something that's very critical. If you're so out of touch with this major issue that affects so many of our constituents and of our city, then that says a lot.
Okay, thank you. And I'm gonna come to you in a second, but we're gonna go down real quick, because I have a number of these little, like, just yes and no, real quick answers. How long have you lived in this district?
Almost 20 years.
12.
Since I was an undergraduate at Rice University in 2001.
All right, just checking. Thank you. Okay, so and we're gonna go back to you now. The governor is saying that the state will administer approximately $4.2 billion in Harvey housing dollars, but he slammed big cities. How will you fight for our Harvey funding and local control rights as a candidate and later in office?
I think that's part of the challenge, which is Sarah Davis is supposed to be a member of the majority for a decade, and when this district has been hit with 3 massive historical floods in her time, she couldn't go get rainy day funds when we needed them. We also see that Governor Abbott is playing partisanship with the Harvey relief funds that are supposed to come into the city. And so she ought to be able to advocate for the number of new neighborhoods in her district that have been flooded at least 3 times on her watch, and say to Governor Abbott that it's time to stop playing partisanship with those funds and get the Harvey relief that is brought in. And so that's a delay that's absolutely unexpected, and you would expect that as a member of the majority who's endorsed by Governor Abbott, that she should be able to take care of our citizens. She's not only not taking care of us at the moment that we've had flooding, but she's been part of the Republican stronghold to deny climate change. And denying climate change and failing to address the issue just tells us what we all already know as neighbors in this community. We are going to suffer the consequences of continued flooding without the ability to act. So when we talk about this issue and Harvey and what needs to happen today, we also have to look at where we are going to be for the next decade. And if we don't flip these 9 seats, we don't address the very real possibility of the fact that Texas can be 80% renewable energy independent within 10 years because we have West Texas winds, solar, and coastal winds. We just need the legislature with the vision and the infrastructure to put in place for the corporations to come in and support this new vision and new economy. I will do it.
Okay, well, so don't sit down, we're going right after that. Apparently I follow no order, but that's a good question, because one of the questions I got from someone out here was, please talk about climate change. And in my brain, I think, oh, that's a federal issue, or maybe that's a city or a county issue. I don't so much associate with the state, the House, with the ledge. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me specifically what you would propose, and how you could actually, in the land of big oil, get those policies implemented.
So I've had the privilege for being out and running for these months to meet with many advocates from Rice University, others, talk to people within the field, and guess what? We have the ability, as I just mentioned, to be 80% renewable energy independent because we are Texas. This is one of those areas that we stay off the grid from the West Coast and the East Coast, and we have the ability to have our own energy independence. So as I mentioned, West Texas winds, solar, and coastal winds. We have the ability, if we put in the infrastructure, guess what? Back in 2005, climate change was a bipartisan issue. All we need is to return to that commitment to put in those lines for the infrastructure. Guess what? Corporations that do it right want in on this game. Because this is the new innovative economy. This is the kind of energy independent and efficiency that all of the major corporations that are the good players and not violating regulations know that we need to do it right, we need to do it clean, and we can. We not only can do it and make it economically advantageous, but it's the right thing for our vibrant, and I'm all in on this, and we just need the support.
Okay, great, thank you. Lanny, you mentioned your experience in this public school system. Tell me a little bit about how you think the current school financing scheme, is it acceptable? And if not, what concrete measures would you try to pursue to change it?
Is it acceptable? No. In HISD, 19% of our schools, that's 38,000 families, are sending their child right now to a school rated D or F. And it's time to stop pointing fingers at teachers. It's time to start pointing fingers at the legislators underfunding our schools. And as far as Sarah Davis goes, when you take away $5.4 billion and give us back $5.56 billion 8 years later, you don't get extra credit points for that. Undoing harm doesn't mean you're doing good. Now, what do we need to do concretely is we need to be talking about the Texas Permanent School Fund. A lot of us, we talk about the rainy day fund, about $13 billion. The permanent school fund is sitting there and is $44 billion meant to be used for education. And there has been no legislative oversight of how that fund is managed. We don't need to raise a single dollar of new tax revenue. We have the money sitting there. And if there is any time to be using available funds to improve our schools, to stop teacher turnover, it is now. So as a legislator, I'm going to insist that our legislature exercise its oversight authority and ensure that those funds are being used at an appropriate rate.
Okay, but before you sit down.
Let's do it. Back to back.
Yeah, no, well, a little birdie told me that you're a principal at a charter school, is that right?
I was a principal at a charter school. No
Okay.
longer, but yes.
How are you gonna square that with your history at a charter school with the party's emphasis on improving public education for all?
Well, let's start with the fact that charter schools are public schools. They're open enrollment, there's no tuition, and they're held to the same academic accountability as other schools. Except when a charter school receives a failing grade, it is shut down. So I stand firmly behind the fact that we need charter schools doing innovation work and providing opportunities in places where there aren't opportunity. But good charter schools aren't the answer to our problems because charter schools only serve 6% of students in the state. And so no solution to public education can just include charter schools. We have to make sure that our public districts also have those school choice opportunities, whether it's early college high schools that are very successful on the East End, Arabic immersion, Chinese immersion schools that are happening. We need every parent to find a school that is a just right fit for their child that can include charter schools, but needs to include extremely strong district schools as well.
Great, thank you so much. Ruby, tell me what you think needs to be done. I mean, we all know in 2017 there was at least a school finance package that got passed, but how are you going to make sure that that actually gets funded?
Well, that's a really good point. And we realized that in 2017, they were talking about bathroom bills and SB4, the anti-immigration bill, and then they lost 12 seats, and then we started talking about education. So that's really exciting because we're only 9 seats away from having the majority. And so that's why that actually really matters, because we're going to have to be able to keep arguing for students and for education and for teachers and make sure that the funding is a priority. Because really HB3 was really just a good start. And in fact, it's not going to last very long, and we're going to need to make sure that we can address the long-term funding and address all of the other systematic issues that are affecting teachers and administration in the long run. And I think that this is really important because we need someone that's going to be in Austin, that's going to be advocating for our children, who has children, who's been running around and doing what's best for them, organizing parents to go to Austin and who actually live the day-to-day and know what it's like to work with principals and students and teachers and make sure that there's testing and having to have conversations with your kids about the stress of having to pass these tests. And so that is what I will do when I get to Austin, but we need to make sure that we flip the district, but we also make education a priority so we get out of the bottom third.
And I'm going to throw this to Ann now, because I think this is one of those issues that's at the top of everybody's list. But what are your thoughts? And tell us how you differentiate maybe from your fellow candidates on some of these school financing issues that face the legislature.
So they're right, we cut 5.3, the legislature and Sarah Davis cut $5.3 billion in 2011. And what they did with HB3, because we took 12 Democratic seats, is either going to be a really great foundation or it's going to be a poison pill. Because they only gave enough funding for 2 years. But what they did was offset a cap on what we can provide in county appraisal and bring in our property values to supplement the reduction in state contribution. What we've seen over the last decade is the state has gone from their contribution of 50% down to 38%. And while they put it a little bit back this time, They've put us in a position where HISD for the last few years has fallen into recapture. And what that means, even though many of you will know that we are not a rich district, and we have many people that are our school reduced and free breakfast and lunch and are in poor need, we have spent $300 million back to the state. And then we're criticized when some of our schools are having challenges. The distinction on charter schools are great, but charter schools get to pick their students, and they get to do a lottery. So they get to have students that want to be there and the family that supports them. The challenge is public education needs to be there for every child in every environment of every economic opportunity. And the only way that we can do that is by flipping 9 seats to have a public commitment to increase those state funds, since we know they just put in place a county cap, which can be absolutely devastating if we don't take 9 seats. And that's why we have to win District 134 for public education.
Okay, great, thank you so much. I'm going to jump into something, there's going to be some simple yes or no's, we're just going to go down the line. I call this the purity test, right? Because we all think we're Democrats, we share the same values, and then you find out somebody that was elected somewhere doesn't have this, and you're like, where was that? Why didn't I know? So we're just going to go down the line. We'll start with Ann and just go on. These are simple yes or no's. First, if you don't win, will you commit to supporting, endorsing, working for, and voting for the Democratic nominee?
Absolutely.
Okay, next.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Okay, hold on to the mic, we'll go backwards. Are you pro-choice?
Yes.
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 Pro-marriage equality?
Absolutely. My wife's doing his right over there.
Don't have to be here,
Yes.
And I also am a strong supporter of Ann's marriage as well.
Anti-bathroom bill?
Yes.
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 Using unionized campaign workers?
Yes.
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 And are you a sustaining member of the Harris County Democratic Party?
Yes.
Yes.
I know who threw in that question. Yes.
She didn't, she really didn't. But thank you for that. Okay, good, you all pass. That's excellent. So let me go to the next question. As we know, Sarah Davis likes to claim that she is a moderate. We talked a little bit about this today, but she has retained her A/B rating with the NRA every election cycle. She has fallen in line with Greg Abbott, Dan Patrick, by voting for campus carry, open carry, Army K-12 teachers, and school personnel, keeping silencers legal, and last session voting for permitless carry of loaded guns following a declared disaster like Harvey. Even where law enforcement has testified against dangerous bills, she has voted with the NRA. Texas leads the nation in mass shootings and unintentional shootings of children. You can tell someone else wrote this for me. HD 134 has seen its share of these events. What will your response to Sarah Davis be, and what would you prioritize for passage in the upcoming Texas legislative session?
Where we start?
Yeah, Ruby. Yeah, you're next.
All right. Well, you know, this is an issue that we definitely have to use when we're getting people to not vote for her again and make sure that we talk about her gun history. That's true. I mean, she's voted for silencers, she voted for guns in emergency, she voted to reduce the amount needed to get a concealed gun license, the amount of hours you needed for concealed gun license, and she just overall is really out of touch with our community. And I graduated high school during Columbine, so most of my life has been worried about shootings less than not. And so the priority would be background checks on every gun sale, because we have so many loopholes and we have ways for people to get guns that don't have to go through background checks. And we also need to make sure we have red flag laws. Every state that's enacted red flag laws has seen a reduction in gun deaths, and it's a simple math. The statistics are there. We need to do it. There's also initiatives to implement the Be Smart campaign, and that we've seen in San Antonio with the education. ISDs are doing that, and that's really, it's pretty cheap. It's a way to save lives, and it teaches people about how to store their guns. And so those would be a few of the initiatives that we could do right away. We're seeing this happening all around the country. And as a mom of two, when I put my kids on the bus, I want to make sure they're going to come home to me. So this is very important to me.
Great, thank you. And I see so many moms demand action folks out there. that if I don't make everybody answer this question, they'll fight me on the way out. So Lanny, I'm gonna throw it to you.
Yep.
How would you respond to Sarah Davis, and what would you prioritize for passage in the upcoming session?
Well, first is we need Sarah Davis to answer for the 3,193 Texans who die every year on average to gun violence. That's an unacceptable number. And here in District 134, Lamar High School student DeLindsay Mack was shot outside the Lamar High School campus. So this is not an abstract threat, this is right here in District 134, and Sarah Davis needs to answer for that. Now, there are three things we need to pass. First, we need to close those background check loopholes, and specifically the domestic partner loophole or the boyfriend-girlfriend loophole that doesn't consider domestic violence from a non-married partner as disqualifying you from purchasing a weapon. That makes no sense. And again, those are folks who should not be in possession of firearms. We also need to pass the red flag laws because as a principal, I know firsthand, sometimes families go into crisis not because they're bad, but because they're in crisis. And people in crisis don't need to turn into families facing a tragedy, which means we need to provide our legal system and our law enforcement with recourse to remove firearms from those homes. And finally, we need to make sure that we pass an assault weapons ban because weapons of war have no place in the hands of civilians. There shouldn't be a weapon that can take out a classroom full of children before a teacher gets out of their chair. That is not acceptable. And Sarah Davis needs to answer for the 81% of Texans who agree with closing those loopholes and the 68% of Texans who agree with those red flag laws. She needs to answer to them and answer to the rest of us in this room.
I happened to go to El Paso a couple days after the mass shooting. I just happened to be there for another law enforcement training. And I sat down next to a woman who, when I asked her how things were, she let me know that a number of her family members had been shot and killed in that Walmart. Not shortly after, Midland, Odessa occurred. And that's what we've heard from Texas. Our legislators have been completely silent. They didn't respond in the face of 65 Texans that were slaughtered in our streets, our malls, our schools. In 2 years, even though we had a legislative session, not one act. And in fact, the NRA's response to last session was it's one of the best that they've had in Texas. The only way that we make this different is to flip the 9, and it starts with Sarah Davis because she has remained loyal to that NRA rating. We've already talked about the things that she's passed. When they were silent, I already called for a special session. You see, we could go back to work. We don't just have to work part-time. The special means when there's an urgent need, we return to Austin and take action. And so I called for these things. Background checks, extreme risk protection orders, and safe storage. And you know what? Any one of those provisions would have had the ability to stop all 4 of our top mass shootings that we've experienced in Texas. The silence has got to end. And it ends on Election Day in November. And I know I am the gun-sense candidate that can beat Sarah Davis in November. I need your support. Thank you.
Okay, I mentioned this at the top of the introduction, and we all know it's coming up. You guys have mentioned it, redistricting. It's the #1 reason we need to flip the Texas House. But if elected, you can't work alone. What strategies do you think are important for the Democratic delegation to get meaningful redistricting in Texas?
Well, you can't get anything done in your normal life or in politics if you don't work together and you build coalitions and community. And that's what I've been doing my whole life, to be able to be out there and to advocate for different things and to have started my law firm and everything and raised my family. Those are things that I do no matter what. And having lived in other countries, I have to make friends quickly. And so that's what we're going to have to do when we're going to hopefully get the majority, right? We're working towards that. But that doesn't mean we're going to have it in the Senate. And we're going to have to be able to work together. And we're going to know that we're going to get closer to what we really want. But we have to make sure that we are working in line. And we need to make sure what really matters most when we're redistricting is that everyone gets their voice. And we need to make sure that we're working to that end. Because really what's going to happen is we're predicting the next decade. And if we don't flip it, and that's what really matters, then we're not going to be able to have this conversation. But we know that we need to put everything into flipping this, but in the redistricting, I think we're gonna want to do the best we can, making sure everyone has a voice and looking at the big picture.
All right, thank you so much. Anne, you can't have redistricting until we have the census. Now, I know you will not be in place to help policy-wise on this, but if you had been, what do you think the state should be doing to help with census responses and educating the public about why the census is important?
So I think this goes back to one of the important concepts when you talk about Senate Bill 4. I work in your criminal court system, work around law enforcement, and guess what happens when you push people into the shadows and say that if you look like my wife and get pulled over on traffic, you might have to prove that you're a citizen. That's the damning effect of that kind of race-baiting hatred legislation that was put in place in Texas to try to keep people. It's voter suppression. And it's the putting people in a position to say, don't reach out and be part of your government because you could be at risk. So it is about educating and informing people and making sure that everybody knows their rights, making sure they know their importance, and making sure that they know that they need to be counted towards this census. We are looking at the possibility of picking up 3 congressional seats. And that's why so many on the other side don't want those individuals coming forward to count who they are in the services that are needed here, such as Medicaid expansion. But that's also the reason why you need redistricting. You need redistricting and you need fair lines so that we're not facing what we have now, which right now, your congressional lines are so carved up that you are almost guaranteed to have 2/3 Republican, even though we don't even vote anywhere close to that. So let me tell you what I'm gonna do on redistricting. I will absolutely reach across the aisle, but sometimes you gotta dig in and you gotta know what's important. And as a House member, I will stand with our speaker, just like we see Nancy Pelosi against Trump. And I will say, we need a Democratic speaker that tells Governor Abbott and Lieutenant Patrick, nothing else gets through here until you give us fair lines and let every voice be heard.
What's your plan to fight Republican agenda of voter suppression and making it harder to vote in schools and in communities of color?
Absolutely, and we need to talk about the different ways in which the Republicans have attempted to try and reduce the vote. First, we've seen the closure of 750 polling places without any analysis being done on the impact of communities of color. We have seen a Secretary of State try and throw 96,000 voters off of the rolls. And we have seen the fact that the legislature has appropriated no funds, only one of only 15 states who appropriated no funds, to getting an accurate count in the census. So the first thing we need to do is be advocates right now in 2020 before the election to ensure we get an accurate count here in Harris County. If we don't get an accurate count, we may lose as many as 1.7 seats on average. It could be 2, it could be 1. But if we lose those seats, we lose the influence and we lose the voice. And that also impacts our border counties and our folks in El Paso and Dallas as well. So we need to get an accurate count in the census so we have the muscle in the legislature to force their hand. Because Republicans see the writing on the wall. It's either going to happen this decade or next decade. And I think we need to be pushing for an independent redistricting commission at the moment where both sides are fighting for fairness, and that's when we're at 50-50. So for me, that's the push we need to make, is finally creating a fair playing field, and that's only going to happen at this inflection point we're facing as a state.
All right, great, thank you so much. And speaking of getting counted, because my good friend Steve just walked in, and I can tell that some others are about to leave. If you're a lawyer, this actually counts for 1 hour of CLE. So sign this form before you leave, and we'll turn it into the state bar, and you'll get an extra hour of CLE credit this year. So thank you to the Harris County Democratic Lawyers Association for getting this course approved. Speaking of getting counted. Okay, next. Let's talk a little bit about, and I'm going to jump back over to Anne, because you mentioned this in your opening. I want to talk about criminal justice reform. What do you think as a state legislature you can and should be doing on issues that affect criminal justice reform, like sentence reform, the legalization of marijuana? You mentioned your work with juvenile probation, and I know there's a lot that needs to be done in that arena as well, so give your best.
This is hard for only 90 seconds, but I work in your juvenile court system, and don't start it that quickly. I work in your juvenile court system, and let me tell you, one of the things that I'm most proud about is my parents taught me the honor of standing in a court system and stand for those that can't speak for themselves. I had the privilege of taking a case of a 13-year-old child who was charged with prostitution. taking it all the way to Texas Supreme Court, getting it reversed to say that these kids are victims and not offenders. But let me tell you something about this. Guess where your 17-year-olds go? They go into your Harris County Jail because a long time ago we decided to be tough on crime. Your 17-year-old kids go to the Harris County Jail even though they are still protected children under the age of 18. This is a concept called raise the age. It is a common sense reform that needs to happen to put children fairly equated as children across the board at 18. When we talk about bail reform and making sure that people are not in a position to be in the court system to plead because they want out. So guess what happens to your 17-year-olds that are sitting in jail and charged with theft? They're not entitled to have somebody there to say, look to your best interest, and if they say, I'll give you time served, you get out today, they've done it. And so you have a bunch of people walking around your streets that were unfairly convicted at an age where we should have been protecting them as children. When you talk about marijuana, I see it all the time. And the thing that concerns me is I see so many people that are on that edge of survival, and we're in a position where locally we've said, go ahead and smoke it. The horse has left the barn, but guess what? Where are they getting it? We have to regulate it.
All right, thank you. Ruby, I'm going to kind of toss this one back to you, but with a little more emphasis on what do you think, bail reform, for example, is that a state legislative issue, or is that something that should be left to the courts in order to determine on a case-by-case basis? Well, what do you think? And marijuana and all that other stuff that I just mentioned.
Well, I think in general, the local, there should be a lot of local control on issues that relate to their area. I heard a judge recently, and he talked about how he realized that the crime for a certain incident it depends. It's proportional to the person that it happens to, and it really has a different meaning to them. And so I think it's important to be able to have some of that local control. But when we look at the bigger picture, I think we need to look at what's causing some of these problems. Whether it's the poverty, mental health, if it's like a downward spiral where people just can't get up on their own. And I think we have a lot of these issues here in Texas because you could go broke because you don't have health insurance, or you might steal because you're going to go hungry. And I think those are some of the things we have to address on a grander scale. And of course, that it's important that we address these issues because a person could, just be in jail for a long time, even for like a $20 fine, because they can't access legal help and they don't know how to get out. And a lot of times people who are in jail or interact with the law enforcement for these issues are really just trying to get out of a bad situation, whether they're a victim of abuse or a victim of different poverty, and they just can't seem to get a way out.
All right, thank you. Lanny, in your opening, you mentioned healthcare, fully funding healthcare. I think it starts probably with fully funding Obamacare, but whatever. That's not rocket science. Tell me what else you think you, as a member of this Texas House of Representatives, can do to increase funding for healthcare in the state of Texas.
Absolutely. And first I want to talk about the magnitude of why this issue is so important. In the most recent Houston area survey, my old professor, Stephen Kleinberg, released a statistic that 40% of Houstonians don't have more than $400 in savings, which means that we have a huge chunk of Houston that is one broken leg or flu bug away from not being able to make ends meet. And as a teacher and as a principal, I've seen what it looks like when families can't make ends meet. Now, obviously, we need to pass Medicaid expansion. That everyone in here should have been one of the questions. Should have been a purity test question. We need to expand. We need Medicaid expansion. We need it now. But the other thing we need to protect families from is from surprise bills, and those primarily come when you either have an emergency room visit, an ambulance ride, or when a secondary provider such as an anesthesiologist is out of network and all of a sudden you're stuck with a multi-thousand-dollar bill. Now the legislature this past session passed a bill protecting folks on state-regulated insurance from those kinds of charges. We need to expand that protection to all health insurance plans because those surprise charges can take a planned medical procedure and turn it into a family emergency. So as a legislator, I'm going to make sure that we prevent those surprise bills and keep families safe and healthy.
All right, thank you so much. Ruby, actually, you know what? I'm going to stick with you. I'm going to stick with Lanny here because you're the only non-lawyer up here. So let's
Yes,
talk
I am.
about tort reform.
Yes, there we go. There we go.
Sarah Davis touts her work in the area of tort reform. Have her efforts gone too far? And if so, how? And what would you do? What would you propose as suggested changes?
Well, I have to be honest. I don't know very much about Sarah Davis's record on tort reform. That's not an issue that is prime for me. So, but I think what we need to do is make sure that whenever there is a lawsuit, whenever there are these procedures, that they're in line with reality and they're not exorbitant and not done in ways that prevent folks from operating and prevent folks from being able to be made whole.
Great, thank you so much. And I mentioned this class is available for 1 hour of CLE. So, Ruby, tort reform. Has Sarah Davis gone too far, and what do you think could be done to protect the rights of individuals who have been injured?
Well, I think if you don't have consequences to making a dangerous place or creating a vehicle that you know is going to fail, or if you've done the math and you figure it's not really going to be worth it, it doesn't matter if we get sued because it's still good for business, then that is a problem. And so I think it's really important that we have a balance. And so if I've traveled a lot, I've gone to other countries, and I know I'm a lawyer now, but when I was traveling, sometimes I wasn't. And I would go around and I would say, why do they leave that hole right there? Someone's going to fall. But you know, if you don't have a consequence to having that hole, no one's going to fix it. And so that's the reason why we need to have a balance. And so, you know, sometimes it might seem the US goes a little crazy, and we have had our tort classes in law school, but at the same time, we're finding a balance because we're protecting the person who gets hurt and injured, and we're also protecting and making sure that businesses and those who control the manufacturing or those who control an environment are reliable and responsible.
All right, well, because I have the microphone and I'm a voter too, I'm curious, an article came out today that the independent committee that was tasked to study judicial selections is going to recommend the enactment of nonpartisan judicial elections. Is that something you as a legislature will favor?
So my dad was actually in the legislature in the 60s, and he proposed nonpartisan judicial elections. And I think he was right back then. And so the question is whether or not somebody can follow the law, and that's a position that we want people to be in. We don't want judges to be in a position from legislating from the bench and everything else, and we have heard that. We have some phenomenal judges, and we have seen as the times have swung. Actually, my mom, the Honorable Carolyn Marks Johnson, is here, and she was the only Democrat to win when she ran for judge in 1994. So I have personally experienced the position of a judge being on the bench and being held accountable to the partisan wins. And when the judges are there and they're taking the bench, as you do, each time, one side's not going to be happy with the other. And I want those individuals to be free to make their right decision. I will also say my dad was a civil lawyer for 50 years. We call it the prosecution of civil crimes. It's a chance for 12 fair people to come in front of a fair judge and make a decision about whether or not somebody has wrong and whether or not they need to be held accountable for choosing profits over people. So anything that we can do to put the court system back in the hands of the people, I support, keeping the fairness and keeping the people in charge.
All right, thank you. Okay, guys, here we're going to do the most open-ended question I probably could ask. We're going to go with you, Ruby, first. I bounced around a lot, and there's probably something I asked one of the other candidates that you were like, oh, I know that one. So tell me, what of the issues that you've not yet had an opportunity to address, is there something that you were just burning to get off your chest to tell this crowd as to why they should pick you over these two other fine candidates for this in this primary?
Well, there's a lot of topics, but one of them that comes to mind is healthcare. We have some of the highest number of uninsured children in the country, and that could be cut in half with just the expansion of Medicaid. So we're literally killing children because we haven't expanded Medicaid. We need to let that sink in. We have to flip the district, but we also need to vote for the expansion. The numbers are proven in the other states. We have 1 in 4 pregnant women are uninsured. And when you don't go for prenatal care, when you don't have that coverage, you're going to have more acute problems, and we have a high mortality rate. That doesn't belong in Texas. That doesn't belong in the United States. We also need, and I've lived without insurance in my life. I've used Planned Parenthood before. When I was traveling between countries, I didn't have health insurance when I was pregnant. It was about a month or so, and it was very scary. My mom didn't have preventative medical care, and she died at 53, a month before my firstborn son was born. And so I know what it's like. This isn't just a topic for me. This is real. I will think about my mom, I will think about my daughter who was born with a rare condition, and the only reason she's alive is because she was born in Texas Medical Center and we had insurance. Otherwise it would have been $500,000 for her coverage. And so this is very important to me, and I can bring that experience to Austin.
Thank you. Lanny, something that I asked somebody else that you wanted to
I was
jump
hoping
in?
you were going to hit me with the environment, and you left me.
Live it up.
I'm going to live my best life.
It's like your choice. What's that called? Like
Choose your own adventure.
Sure.
There it is.
There we go.
Yeah. We read those books with my students. We need to talk about the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality. Those are the folks who are regulating the big businesses who are putting pollutants into our air and into our water. Over the past year, we've seen businesses release 135 million pounds of unauthorized pollutants, such as methane, into our air. And only 1% of those unauthorized releases have resulted in any regulatory action. And the way the regulatory action is decided is if the business says it was accidental and unaware. And that's absurd. We need a Commission on Environmental Quality that is dedicated to making sure that we don't release those pollutants into the air, and that businesses who are bad actors are held accountable for those actions. And this is especially personal to me because when I was teaching on the East End, I had one of those little buzzers in my room that would go off if we needed to shelter in place. And we know that the impacts of this this air pollution are disproportionately borne by Black and brown communities. Over here on the west side, we need to stand up for folks on the east side and ensure that our air is clean and our water is drinkable.
I remember the race in 2010 when Sarah Davis was running against then State Representative Ellen Cohen. And she was a young female who bragged on TV about being a cancer survivor and being anti-Obamacare and the fact that she would fight Obamacare at every turn. I too was a cancer survivor. I was in recovery, I was working in your juvenile courts for the indigent, and guess what? I was desperately waiting for Obamacare. I still live with a pre-existing condition, and so I know that Sarah Davis and the promise that she made in 10 has been held true for a decade on the failure to expand Medicaid. And that failure to expand Medicaid has cost us $114 billion. So when we talk about the needs everywhere else for the environment, for the education, we are talking about money that all of us already paid. We have all paid our federal taxes, and we sent it to come back to help those of us here in the most need. And the Republicans and Sarah Davis have rejected it on pure partisanship. Texans are literally dying because of it. And we are smuggling the investment, or smothering the investment within the medical community. Failure to bring back our funds not only hurts us, but it hurts the economy within this district that will lead us for the next decade. And I can't believe that I am standing miles away from the greatest medical center in the world. And because of something that she is doing to stay loyal to the Republicans, many of us in this room can't walk in their doors.
Great, thank you so much. This is going to be my last question, and we're going to just go down the row again, then we'll each give you a little bit of time for closing. I want to know what you think, your priority list. What are the 3 most important issues that face House District 134? The 3 most, and what would your priority list be? 1, 2, 3 things you want to get accomplished. Go ahead, Ann.
So I'm going to give you an A and a B. The A is what we have to do by a constitutional requirement, which is public education and health, that they're failing to do right now. And then the B is the things that if we don't do immediately, we're going to die from them. Climate change and guns. And then we give you the umbrella that holds A and B together. we don't get any of this without redistricting and gerrymandering and fair lines for the next decade. Those are my commitments the moment I walk onto the Texas floor in 2021, recognizing that the voice that you put there is going to determine what we do for a decade and our priorities going forward. I will be that fighter for those issues.
Great, thank you. Ruby?
Well, we need to be thinking about our future. That involves education, our future generation, our children, and making sure that we're going to be marketable in the workplace, and we're thinking about our future. We need to make sure that we're taking care of our climate so that we're going to be here more than the next generation or two, and that we have a place for our children. And we need to make sure that we have health, like I mentioned. If we don't take care of ourselves, what's the point? And we need to make sure we put an investment in health as well as gun safety. It's very important.
Thank you so much. Lynn?
Education's number one. And with all due respect to all the lawyers in the room, I believe we have lawyers well represented in our legislature right now. But currently, education is a third of the state budget, and we only have 3 or 4 folks in the legislature with any K-12 teaching experience. If we want to make smart decisions on how we're going to improve education funding and use those funds, we need to send educators to Austin in a variety of different positions. Second, healthcare. We have too many folks who are making do and scraping by and avoiding making themselves healthy, some of the preventative care we need, and resorting on going to emergency rooms for their health care instead. That's costing us money, and we need to be not good at fixing problems on the back end. We need to be better at preventing problems on the front end. And finally is gun violence. This is an epidemic that has gone on for far too long, and it's not because we don't know what to do, it's because we haven't had the guts to do it, and we need a representative in this district who's going to have the guts to stand up and say that it needs to stop now.
We are running ahead of schedule, but I'm going to let everybody give their 2-minute close, and then I think Lily's here, and she wants to come say hi. But I'm gonna let them close first. You just stay there. All right, everybody, you're gonna get a 2-minute opportunity to close, and feel free to address whatever issues you feel like you haven't had a chance to address. And if there's anything I didn't bring up, if I didn't do my job right, there's something that you're like, you should have asked this. Please bring that up now. You've got the time. Give us the reason that we need to cast that ballot for you come March 5th? 3rd. If you go on the 5th, oh, that would be bad. Tell your Republican friends to go on the 5th. I'm just kidding. I'm totally kidding. All right, we'll go backwards this time. Lanny, let's start with you.
Well, we've got a challenge in front of us. We've got to pick a candidate who's going to convince folks to change their minds. Because we've seen the Beto signs alongside the Sarah Davis signs, and it's going to take a different kind of candidate to get them to engage in that conversation and evaluate Sarah Davis's record. And there are 4 characteristics that I believe that candidate needs. And the first is someone who's dedicated to values. And I hope that my work in public schools, I hope my work with bilingual students and sending students to college to be the first in their family to get a post-secondary credential shows you what kind of values I have and that I'll bring to this office. Next, we need someone who's a problem solver. And as someone who's founded a school, as someone who's taught in a classroom that was in a converted warehouse with picnic tables and not a lot of resources, and as someone who started a business from scratch, not in Silicon Valley or not in Austin, but right here in Houston with technology, I believe I'm that kind of problem solver. Finally, we need someone who's gonna show up, Sarah Davis. Someone who's gonna show up for their job. And whether it was from 7 a.m. breakfast duty to getting the buses out the gate at the end of a long school day, I've been a person who's shown up every single day for my students and my families, and I'm gonna do that as the representative from District 134. Now there's a 4th characteristic that this person needs, and it's gonna be fearlessness. And let me tell you, if there's anyone who's got fearlessness in their blood, it's someone who has taught 7th graders. Thank you, I was hoping that joke would work. Thank you. So regardless, I believe that those characteristics and the work I've done make me a candidate who can change people's minds in 2020. That's the work I've done because of the work I've done as a teacher, because of the work I've done as a middle school principal, the work I've done as a business owner, and the work I'll do as your representative in District 134. Thank you.
who voted for Sarah Davis in the past, and they thought she's okay. You know, we need somebody that, we're gonna get them out there, and they're gonna vote for the Democrat, and they're gonna help work to flip this district, and that's really important. I have, for one, I have diversity of thought and experience, having lived in other countries, being a mom of 2 in public school, having learned other languages. I can bring that to the table to help best represent the constituents. And the other thing is that I have a proven track record. I started a business from scratch 10 years ago. I have multiple employees. I've won accolades for my business. I even wrote a book about law practice management. And, you know, I go to bat for my clients. I'm regularly either having to maybe, you know, threaten to sue the federal government or, you know, telling them to put them in their place on what they're doing with my clients. And I definitely am doing the best I can to represent them. And I'm going to bring that fight to my constituents. And I also, the third is that I have the drive and I work hard. I had such a humble upbringing, you know, growing up without AC, growing up without health care. You know, it takes a lot to think about some of the past, but the fact that I was able to overcome a lot of that, and I know I was really lucky, but it also had to do with me working hard as well. And I wish that we could have more of an environment that everyone has that opportunity. But I'm gonna go to Austin, and I'm gonna work for you. I'm gonna show up, I'm gonna be fighting. I'm not gonna be absent half of the time. And that's what we need. This is so important, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our next generations. And so, my name is Ruby Powers, and I'm running for State Rep District 134, and I hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
I grew up here in Houston. And growing up here in Houston, as I mentioned, my dad was in the legislature in the 60s, and he served with Barbara Jordan. And when we were growing up as kids, he told us this wonderful story about being with her in Austin and seeing her come out of the offices of some of the most conservative senators and saying, "What are you doing with them?" And she turned to him and she said, "Jacob, they have votes." My dad taught me at an early age that you do have to reach across the aisle and that public service is an honor. And this is not my first ask to serve you. I've served you in your Harris County District Attorney's Office as a prosecutor. And when I was there, being part and instrumental in creating 2 alternative courts to protect victims of human trafficking, reaching across to the Republican aisle to put something in place despite the fact we didn't have funding or any other services to do it, but we had the passion to get it done. In your court system, I saw a wrong when a 13-year-old child was being treated as an offender rather than a victim. And at the same time, I saw people all around me that told me, "Ann, you're not going to change it. This is just the way we've always done it." And I said, "Well, the last court in the land is going to have to tell me so." And it took years to get that child's case to the Texas Supreme Court. And I am proud to tell you that when we got there, we not only won, protecting this child, protecting children in the state of Texas, but making a landmark decision that protected the nation. And I still train on this nationwide. And when I do, people say, "Texas? Really? This came out of Texas?" And I say, "Yes." And so guess what they're saying now? "Really? Y'all are gonna turn Texas blue?" Yeah, we are. And it starts right here in 134. I promise to give you the fight, to know when to fight, when to stand, and when to reach across the aisle. I will do it for all Texans, for the values and the issues that we know are so important. I'm honored to have your vote.
Thank you. Let's give it up for him. This is pretty awesome. I gotta tell you. I mean, the one thing I know for sure is it takes a lot of guts to put your name out there and come out and ask strangers to vote for you because you're just trying to do the best you can to make the world a little bit better than you left it. And these 3 people are all doing that, and I admire all of you for it. I think you guys are great. Straight up. Nobody's gonna win this election until you are. And the 2 of you who don't, if I don't see your name on a ballot in the future, I'm gonna come find you and hunt you down with all these Moms Demand Action people, and we're coming to get you. So thank you, you guys are awesome. So now I'm turning it over to Lily. Yay, let's give it up for Lily Shecker, the chair of the Democratic Party.
And this class is available for 1 hour of CLE for all voters. Very, very briefly, my name is Lily Schechter. I'm the chair of the Harris County Democratic Party, and we are thrilled that this cycle we have so many candidates running on the Democratic ticket. It is so exciting that we have 3 candidates, and March 4th, whichever one of you wins, we would, March 4th, whichever one of you wins, I want you in our office so we can talk about the November election. Because while the primary is incredibly important, because we do want to engage Democrats all over the county and have a huge turnout for the primary, our real fight is in November. November, we have to turn out every single Democrat we know to make sure that we beat Republicans in the November 2020 election. As you have all heard, there are 9 House seats at stake, but it's more than that. It's making sure we vote in all of our Democratic judges up and down the ballot to make sure that we re-elect all of them, so that Texas shows the rest of the United States that we are a battleground state, and it starts here in Harris County. I'm going to do one quick plug. It's www.harrisdemocrats.com. Again, www.harrisdemocrats.com. That is the website for the local Democratic Party. Please sign up to become a sustaining member. Sign up to get our newsletter so you can see all these wonderful activities that we're doing all around the county, because that is the way we can communicate back and forth. So www.harrisdemocrats.com. Please sign up. We need all of you to volunteer and make sure that we get out all Democrats, not only in the primary, but in the general election. So thank you all. Y'all are amazing. And also, Judge Tanya Garrison. Many of you may not know this about Judge Garrison. She is a judge during the day. At night, she's actually an artist. And at our events at the party over the last couple of years, she has made all of our signs. And I'm talking hundreds of signs at this point that she does, and they are amazing. So we love you for all of your work and everything that you do. So thank you so much. All right, cool. Excellent. I am that cool. Are you wanting to say one more thing, or are we gonna? The most awesome thing about being done early is that you guys can have time to talk to these candidates, because I'm guessing there's questions you have that you want them to answer. But Rufi, yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you all for coming, but we still have lots of food back there. So please grab some, eat some, and yes, please come up and talk to the candidates. Thank you so much, and have a good evening.